In December 1942, high above the Solomon Islands, 19-year-old tail gunner Eddie Kowalski braces himself inside a B-17, clutching a shuddering Browning M2 machine gun. A Japanese Zero appears at his 10 o'clock position, roughly 300 yards away, streaking from left to right like an arrow through his sightline. Eddie follows his gut reaction completely. He centers the sights right on the foe's body and pulls the trigger. 50 shots roar forth. The tracers curve through the sky, and Eddie sees each one zip uselessly past the Zero's rear. The enemy pilot makes no attempt to dodge. He simply continues on, unscratched, as Eddie's ammo dial drops toward zero. This wasn't a personal shortcoming for Eddie. Such moments repeated endlessly in every battlefront of World War II during its initial phases. U.S. gunners, highly skilled, driven, armed with the best firearms ever built, kept missing. Not just now and then, but relentlessly. Early in 1943, the Army Air Forces launched an investigation, reviewing gun camera recordings from bombing runs in Europe and the Pacific. The findings were devastating. Expert aerial gunners managed hit percentages under 4% on targets passing sideways, just 4%. That implied out of every 100 shots aimed at a plane traveling at right angles to the shooter's line, 96 ended up striking only empty space. The numbers were unforgiving. A standard clash might span 8 to 12 seconds until the hostile plane veered away or slipped beyond reach. The Browning M2 unleashed around 800 rounds each minute, or about 13 per second. Over 10 seconds, a shooter could unleash 130 bullets theoretically. At 4% accuracy, only 5 would likely connect. 5 impacts wouldn't bring down a Zero, much less a tough machine like the Focke-Wulf F-190. Axis fighters from Germany and Japan could take scores of 50 caliber strikes and still stay airborne. The toll on lives was immense. During 1943, the 8th Air Force over Europe averaged 188 bombers lost monthly. Each B-17 held 10 crew members. That equaled 1,080 airmen dead, taken prisoner, or unaccounted for every 30 days. A large share of those casualties stemmed from bomb groups unable to repel fighter assaults adequately. The gunners followed every protocol from their drills. They tracked the incoming threat, held steady visual contact, and managed their firing bursts. The issue lay not in their valor or dedication. It was fundamental physics. And physics ignored heroism. Every shooter naturally targeted the visible object straight on. It seemed logical. Aim at the desired impact point. Fire. Hit achieved. Such reasoning held up well for static objects on a shooting range or even pursuing game like a deer at 20 mph. Yet hostile planes weren't wildlife. They traversed the gunner's view at velocities over 300 mph. Certain late-war designs, such as the Me-262 jet, reached 540 mph. At such paces, the interval for a projectile to go from barrel to intended spot ensured the plane had already shifted by impact time. The round itself traveled swiftly at about 2,900 feet per second from a Browning M2. That felt immediate, and at close quarters against sluggish foes, it essentially was. But in dogfights, close meant 200 to 400 yards, with adversaries hurtling at velocities unimaginable 2 decades prior. A Zero at 300 mph spanned 440 feet each second. Calculate for a 300-yard engagement, that's 900 feet. At 2,900 feet per second, the bullet required about 0.31 seconds to bridge it. Not much, right? Yet in that 0.31 seconds, the Zero advanced 136 more feet, equivalent to 11 car lengths. The shooter lined up on the plane's current spot, but the round reached the spot it had occupied a third second earlier, slicing through vacant sky as the attacker pressed on unharmed. This effect went by deflection error. Experts in military science grasped it conceptually well before World War II, but grasping it in lectures differed vastly from countering it in battle. The necessary lead wasn't a small tweak, it was enormous and went against intuition. For a 90-degree crosser at 300 yards, the shooter had to point 15 to 20 feet beyond the plane's front. That involved placing the sights in what appeared as barren airspace, relying on the enemy to intersect the bullet path. All innate urges rebelled against it. Instructors in gunnery courses attempted to instill deflection techniques in practice sessions, yet outcomes proved poor. The Army Air Force's flexible gunnery training at Laredo, Texas, implemented intensive courses from 1942 onward. Students endured hours in turret trainers, gunners fired at drag targets from rolling vehicles, and examined charts illustrating ideal lead positions. Yet none of this prepared them adequately for actual battle. The core issue lay in the intricacy. Deflection involved far more than one simple equation. It shifted continuously based on the enemy's velocity, approach angle, distance, elevation, whether the foe was ascending or descending, and if one's own plane was banking. A B-17 ball turret operator facing a Bf-109 head-on assault required a distinct lead from confronting the identical fighter during a lateral pass from the flank. And that operator might have only 4 seconds to account for every factor amid incoming fire, as his bomber jolted through flak bursts, with his oxygen gear misting over at 25,000 feet. The mental hurdle proved as lethal as the mechanical one. Veterans who endured their initial sorties and attempted deflection techniques frequently gave up following seeming misses. They would point ahead of an adversary, unleash a volley, watch their tracer rounds curve harmlessly across the void in front of the hostile aircraft, and decide they had overcompensated. In the following clash, they would shorten their lead, shifting their sights nearer to the apparent position of the target. This adjustment headed precisely the wrong way, favoring visual instinct over the unseen laws of physics. Film from 1943 combat sorties reveals this error time and again. Opening salvos with a forward offset, then follow-up shots creeping rearward until the shooter was aiming straight at or even just behind the enemy's present spot. The toll in lives grew relentlessly. Records from the 8th Air Force's October 1943 raids on Schweinfurt indicated 20% attrition, with 60 bombers lost out of 291 sent. Those who made it back touched down bearing fallen and injured comrades, ruptured fluid systems, and motors belching fumes. During after-action reviews, the gunners voiced the identical dismay. They had fired, their weapons functioned, but their projectiles failed to strike. A profound shift was essential, and it needed to occur swiftly, lest the current attrition rates doom the Allied aerial offensive before it could strike Berlin. The remedy had lingered in archives since 1924, authored by a figure unknown to most flying personnel. Lieutenant Colonel James Puckle, not the famed inventor of the defensive firearm, but a U.S. artillery specialist skilled in trajectories, had issued a scholarly article entitled "The Problem of Lead in Aerial Gunnery" while teaching at the Army's Field Artillery School. Puckle was no detached scholar. He had fought in France in World War I, observed the awkward origins of dogfighting, and foreseen how rising airspeeds would trigger a sighting dilemma that conventional shooting skills could not resolve. His work presented the equations with stark precision. Puckle proved that once planes surpassed 150 mph, the necessary deflection angles would outstrip natural human judgment. He figured that versus a perpendicular moving target at 250 mph, the shooter must direct fire about 4 to 5 plane lengths beyond the visible mark. The document featured tables and detailed graphs depicting required offsets for diverse mixes of enemy speed, distance, and traversal angle. A 200-yard engagement at a 90-degree cross against a 300 mm foe demanded a 47-foot lead. The same opponent at 400 yards called for 94 feet. These figures were overwhelming, and Puckle's verdict even more sobering. Lacking mechanical aids, air gunners would become practically ineffective within 10 years. The military archived his study and let it gather dust. As aviation surged ahead in the 1920s and 1930s, shooting instruction clung to World War I principles. Teachers emphasized basics like sight alignment, trigger squeeze, breathing technique, treating trainees as if they were gearing up for a ground-based rifle match instead of a high-speed multi-axis pursuit at 300 mph. The handful calling for sophisticated lead practice were brushed off as doomsayers. After all, the logic held, Americans had long excelled as shooters. Daniel Boone, Sergeant York, the legacy of pioneer precision. Certainly those talents would adapt to sky warfare with sufficient drills. They failed to. Upon America's plunge into World War II in December 1941, the Army Air Force's shooting preparation was disastrously ill-suited to the demands of contemporary aerial warfare. The typical course ran 4 weeks. Trainees expended around 1,000 rounds across their full certification. Much of that ammo targeted fixed objects and sluggishly pulled banners, traveling at perhaps 150 mph along straight paths. No exercise mirrored the pandemonium of an FW-190 plunging into a bomber group at 400 mph amid a corkscrew maneuver. Completers earned their badges, boarded heavy aircraft, headed to Britain or the Pacific. They realized their gunnery preparation was useless the moment a zero appeared on their sights. By the summer of 1942, frantic leaders began scouring outdated technical archives for any potential solutions. Captain Robert Williams, working in the 8th Air Force's Gunnery Analysis Unit, uncovered Puckle's 1924 document in the records at Wright Field. He devoured it in a single read, then quickly prepared a note for his superior, emphasizing 2 phrases with triple underlines. It hit him instantly. Puckle had foreseen this precise catastrophe 18 years prior to the initial B-17 combat flights over Europe. The math held up perfectly. The alerts were spot on. Yet countless U.S. airmen had perished simply because no one had paid attention. The issue wasn't Puckle's accuracy. The figures were beyond debate. The real challenge was figuring out if corrective measures could even be implemented. Teaching shooters to deliberately compute deflection while under fire appeared unfeasible. The mind couldn't handle trig functions amid battle tempo, but if deliberate math failed, perhaps an alternative approach could succeed. The British were already uncovering solutions, driven by identical urgency back in the hot summer of 1940. RAF Squadron 609, operating Spitfires from Middle Wallop, confronted a shooting dilemma eerily similar to what U.S. bombers would face 2 years on. Their aviators showed courage. Their planes were exceptional, yet shots kept missing. Flight Lieutenant John Dundas examined camera footage from July clashes and learned his group's success rate against oncoming Messerschmitt Bf-109Ns lingered at about 6%. That equated to just 6 hits per 100 rounds. The Spitfire held ammo for around 16 seconds of continuous shooting. Flyers depleted their full allotment during fights and saw enemy planes escape unscathed. Squadron leader Horace Darley, leading 609 Squadron, took a bold step. He sidelined his whole team for 3 days in early August 1940, smack in the heart of the Battle of Britain when every plane was vital aloft, and ran live-fire tests that broke every RAF instruction guideline. Darley had competed in skeet shooting pre-war and grasped a key insight on anticipating shifting targets that experts in military tactics had ignored. Top trap shooters didn't measure lead, they sensed it. Their minds gauged the discus path instinctively. Their arms guided the gun forward intuitively, sans deliberate number crunching. Darley pondered if jet jockeys might develop that gut-level reaction too. His trial was straightforward and harsh. He arranged for a Hurricane to drag a banner target over the firing field as his Spitfire crews executed multiple attack runs. Rather than the usual tactic of precise targeting and lead estimation, Darley directed them in a method that seemed mad. Skip the aiming altogether. Observe the target's trajectory instead. Follow its course with your gaze and open fire as your plane is still banking to pursue. Allow the angle to emerge organically from your maneuver, not from forced sight tweaks. Shoot toward where intuition points the enemy will be, ignoring the current visual spot. Initial tries flopped badly. Flyers overshot the banner by 50 feet, tracers carving lines through vacant air. Still, Darley insisted on retrees, 40 runs apiece across those 3 days. No talks on trajectories, no geometry lessons, no charts of angles, just drills with a single directive: shoot amid the swing, not once settled on aim. On day 3, a striking shift occurred. Success ratios started rising, modestly at first, from 6% to perhaps 12%. That improvement translated to double the impacts on German planes, doubling takedowns or crippling foes so they couldn't sortie again. Darley recorded his outcomes and forwarded them to Fighter Command HQ on August 18, 1940. His summary featured a vital note: the quickest adapters weren't those with superior pre-war shooting records. They were the ones who could override their urge for exact aiming and rely on side vision and kinetic awareness. Per Darley, deliberate thinking lagged too much for aerial dogfights. The fix lay in conditioning the subconscious to manage angles on autopilot, much like a ballplayer's mind predicts a pop fly's drop without crunching path formulas. Fighter Command shared Darley's conclusions, though rollout proved patchy and uneven. Certain units embraced the method eagerly, others rejected it as unproven folly. The RAF's training branch was especially initially hesitant. The instructors resisted the idea strongly. With years of expertise in marksmanship basics, they viewed Darley's method as a complete departure from established shooting protocols. Yet battlefield outcomes spoke volumes. Units adopting the dynamic deflection approach achieved significantly higher destruction rates during the fall of 1940. The evidence proved compelling, leading to the method's subtle integration into routine operations by the start of 1941, despite outdated official guides. U.S. military attachés in Britain documented Darley's techniques thoroughly, but the Army Air Forces grappled with a unique challenge. While fighter aviators might master intuitive deflection via practice, bomber crew members could not. A Spitfire flyer maneuvered the whole plane to exploit motion and angles for instinctive aiming. In contrast, a B-17 tailgunner remained stationary as the bomber droned steadily amid anti-aircraft fire, lacking any evasion options or aircraft dynamics to aid deflection. Reliant solely on his grip on the weapon and gaze at the enemy, he faced limitations. Since deliberate math proved too sluggish and natural movement inaccessible, a mechanical fix became essential. This is where the Massachusetts Institute of Technology stepped in, particularly through the Radiation Laboratories Division 7, formed in early 1942. The title served as intentional camouflage, evoking nuclear work to shield the true focus, fire control devices. Leading the group, Dr. Charles Stark Draper, a 40-year-old specialist, had devoted the prior 10 years to crafting gyro-based tools for plane guidance. Draper recognized that deflection issues boiled down to forecasting. An effective sight had to reveal not the enemy's present position, but its location upon bullet impact. From Draper's workshop came the prototype Mark 14 computing gun sight by July 1943. It resembled futuristic gear, a reflector linked to a 28-pound gyro setup drawing power from the plane's electrical grid. The operator engaged it via a mechanical range setter. By rotating a knob to align markers with the foe's wing width, he supplied vital distance data. Next, he followed the target for about 2 seconds, holding it steady within a compact sighting ring. In that brief interval, the gyro captured the enemy's angular speed, its rate of crossing the view. The innovation truly shone here. The Mark 14's core, comprising cams and gears as analog calculators forged from metal, resolved the deflection formula instantly. Incorporating the operator's range data, gyro-derived motion, and the .50 caliber projectile's ballistics, it determined the precise forward offset for firing. This appeared as an illuminated crosshair, hovering ethereally before the target. No longer did the gunner target the plane itself, he pursued the luminous point. With accurate ranging and fluid tracking, that point indicated the ideal firing spot. The Mark 14 handled computations that might consume a person's mind minutes with pen and notepad, performing them 30 times each second and adjusting non-stop to shifts in angle or distance. Trials at Virginia's Naval Air Station in Norfolk during August 1943 yielded astonishing figures. Novice gunners, previously topping out at 5% accuracy on lateral targets, surged to 18% right away with the Mark 14 on their debut session. Following a week's training, scores exceeded 25. This marked a quintuple boost over handheld sighting, equating to 5 times as many adversary planes hit or downed per clash. Still, producing and fitting thousands of these Mark 14 units fleet-wide demanded time the Allies lacked. Significant output didn't ramp up until early 1944, with new planes prioritized over upgrades to older bombers. Thus, most crewmen on sorties into late 1943 and early 1944 stuck with simple iron sights or rudimentary reflectors lacking computation. They required an instant, gear-compatible solution, no new tech delays, no plane rewiring needed. The answer arose from frontline shooters, not labs, hailing from the Pacific arena where clearer skies and longer ranges often surpassed Europe's foggy battles. Staff Sergeant William Bill Fleming, aboard the USS Lexington as part of the Air Group support team, Waist Gunner Fleming had completed 31 combat sorties by March 1944 and endured the downing of 4 planes. Lacking officer status, a university degree, or even a grasp of gyroscopic precession under pressure, he had nonetheless unleashed around 40,000 bullets in battle and observed strikes on 7 hostile planes firsthand. Moreover, he maintained a logbook. What set Fleming's logbook apart were the drawings of adversary aircraft, featuring manually sketched lines projecting from their fronts to indicate his precise aiming points in victorious encounters. He gauged these advanced positions relative to the enemy's overall size, 2 aircraft spans ahead, or perhaps 3. During a standard post-mission review on March 14, 1944, Fleming shared his logbook with Lieutenant Commander Edward Butch O'Hare, a Medal of Honor winner and elite naval strategist. O'Hare quickly grasped the significance, real-world deflection insights collected amid live firefights. He directed Fleming to lead hands-on drills for all gunners in the group, eschewing theoretical talks in favor of fieldwork with a straightforward approach dubbed the spot shooting technique. Positioning gunners at their stations, Fleming had a fellow crewman parade a scaled-down plane model on a staff across the carrier deck. As it passed from different directions, he instructed them to project their sights ahead by set amounts: 1 plane's length for minor deflections, 2 for average ones, 3 or beyond for sharp traverses. The essence lay in offering a memorable visual cue for split-second use: tally aircraft lengths from the tip, then squeeze the trigger. The Lexington's ordnance chief, doubtful yet eager for viable solutions, greenlit targeted trials amid maneuvers near Truk Lagoon toward the end of March 1944. Reviewing ammo usage and confirmed impacts over the prior 2 months, he then monitored those indicators following Fleming's regimen. The outcomes proved irrefutable. Before the sessions, gunners in the group hit crossing foes at a rate of 4.2 strikes every 100 shots. By late April, merely 6 weeks into spot shooting, efficiency surged to 9.1 hits per 100. Their performance had effectively doubled. News of the method raced across the Pacific Fleet. Come May 1944, adapted versions of Fleming's spot shooting appeared in instruction on the Essex, Enterprise, and Bunker Hill. Gunnery leads on each vessel introduced tweaks, yet the fundamental idea endured: equip shooters with an easy sight-based gauge linked to the foe's visible dimensions, bypassing mental math. No need for a gunner to factor in 0.3 seconds of projectile travel. Simply recall 3 spans ahead for deflections. Its success stemmed from aligning with innate visual cognition. Humans excel at gauging proportions, but falter with raw distances. Demanding a 50-foot lead offered no anchor at 300 yards out, but 2 plane lengths supplied an instant, effortless benchmark. The pursued bandit supplied the ruler, the shooter merely projected it onward. By mid-1944, the Army Air Forces integrated comparable drills, labeling them radius of action firing. Manuals began featuring diagrams of ideal leads, phrased as factors of wingspan or body length. In June 1944, the 8th Air Force Gunnery School at Lavenham, England, overhauled its curriculum to center on the method. Though aircraft attrition stayed high, it started to ease. July 1944 recorded 3.4% bomber losses per sortie, down from 5.2% in October prior, a gap that spared countless airmen, sending them back stateside rather than lost over the Reich. Mastering the approach in theory, however, diverged sharply from applying it in the heat of engagement. Despite the spot shooting tool, the mind clashed with itself once bullets flew. Psychologists assigned to the Army Air Forces captured this dynamic in depth via 1944 talks with gunners fresh from sorties. The problem lay not in comprehension. They flawlessly quoted lead measures in reviews. Rather, under duress, deliberate recall vanished, supplanted by gut reactions urging, target the danger directly. At Bovington, Army psychologist Captain Harold Kleen dissected this via gun camera reviews alongside after-action accounts. He pinpointed a recurring mode. He labeled it threat fixation collapse. During an engagement, gunners would initiate with accurate deflection. Yet as the opposing fighter approached and the sense of peril grew, their targeting would gradually shift rearward, ending up firing straight at or past the target. According to Klein's findings, this breakdown occurred most rapidly in frontal assaults, where the relative velocity between the bomber and attacker surpassed 500 man-hours, leaving the gunner with only about 2 seconds before the foe began shooting. In such acute pressure, methodical aiming gave way to instinctive response, focus on the frightening object and fire. The remedy lay in relentless practice, enough to make deflection shooting an unconscious reflex, akin to the automatic neural processes involved in strolling or snaring a tossed sphere. Yet, in 1942 and 1943, the armed forces lacked the resources for such prolonged preparation. By the closing months of 1944, however, with the Allies gaining aerial superiority and more robust training systems in place, gunnery programs lengthened. What started as a 4-week curriculum in 1942 stretched to 8 weeks and later 10. Trainees now expended 5,000 rounds in exercises, up from 1,000. Crucially, more than half of those shots targeted dynamic objects simulating actual battle velocities. Beginning in August 1944, the Naval Air Gunner School in Jacksonville, Florida, introduced an innovative exercise. They fitted 50 caliber weapons onto mechanized turrets capable of swift rotation and elevation, while swift vessels dragged targets over the waves at velocities reaching 60 knots, altering ranges and approach directions unpredictably. Novice gunners tackled these setups numerous times daily, 50 to 70 attempts, until anticipating the target's path turned instinctive. During sessions, trainers avoided spoken guidance. Instead, they let students fire, evaluate the impact distribution, tweak their approach, and try once more. The instinctive faculties absorbed lessons from these iterative cycles more efficiently than deliberate explanations could teach the analytical mind. Analysis of battle recordings from veteran gunners who endured 30 or more sorties revealed an impressive trait. Even amid fierce duress, their offset aiming held steady. As an FW-190 barreled into the group with bursts erupting from its wing cannons, these seasoned operators sustained the correct lead without deliberation. Their rational thoughts might reel in fear. Plenty confessed to believing death imminent in some clashes, but their actions preserved the ideal alignment regardless. They had reached the martial discipline known as Mushin, or no mind, where skill executes free of willful control. Achieving that mastery, though, demanded time and bullets that eluded most personnel. Wartime preparation constraints proved harsh. Producing a proficient offset marksman necessitated 5,000 training cartridges and 10 weeks of rigorous drills. But with the bombing campaign demanding 50,000 fresh gunners within half a year, shortcuts were unavoidable. Most who entered battle never attained full instinctive mastery. They hovered in the deliberate proficiency phase, able to execute offset fire when circumstances permitted reflection, yet prone to faltering when overwhelmed by panic or unforeseen maneuvers. This led to an odd hierarchy in defensive capabilities. A bomber group's protective output varied widely. It hinged largely on the expertise of individual gunners in particular spots aboard certain planes. Units fortunate to have multiple battle-hardened airmen with thorough preparation could repel assaults that would cripple squads of less seasoned teams. Axis aces adapted by spotting and capitalizing on these weaknesses, zeroing in on aircraft displaying tentative or errant bursts on first approaches, while steering clear of groups unleashing prompt, intense, and spot-on countermeasures. The shift in offset aiming, sparked by UK trials and US urgency, persisted long after World War II wrapped up in 1945. The essential idea of directing fire to the enemy's future position rather than its current one underpinned all subsequent armaments. The Mark IV computing gun sight progressed to the Mark VIII, which endured into the Korean conflict, and onward to electronic controllers handling myriad factors at once. During Vietnam, combat jets featured radar-supported sighting that computed offsets autonomously, asking only that aviators hold foes in the tracking zone. The F-4 Phantom's lead computing optical sight accomplished in microseconds tasks that Draper's analog gyros managed in notable time slices. Today's dogfights have mostly abandoned guns altogether. Ordnance manages takedowns at distances demanding leads measured in miles, not yards. Still, the basic principles endure, merely the execution evolves. An AIM-120 AMRAAM missile relies on inertial navigation, and active radar systems constantly refine their paths to intercept where a target is headed, performing deflection computations thousands of times each second. The AN/APG-77 radar on the F-22 Raptor goes beyond mere tracking. It forecasts upcoming locations using present speed and changes in motion, then adjusts the plane's stance and chooses armaments to match. This mirrors the challenge William Fleming tackled using pencil drawings back in 1944, except now computers manage teraflops of data rather than gunners estimating aircraft spans. Notably, the core ideas of deflection shooting endure in today's fighter pilot curricula. Even though guns serve as backup options in current aerial battles, the Navy Fighter Weapons School, known as Top Gun, continues to cover fundamental maneuvers focused solely on gunfights. The goal isn't preparing for cannon-based duels, but building visual foresight for dodging threats, a skill that enhances every element of dogfighting. A flyer proficient in deflection firing instinctively grasps approach speeds, angular offsets, and pursuit arcs, ideas crucial regardless of whether unleashing shells or lining up for a rocket launch. These principles reach far outside flying, into realms with swiftly shifting objectives. Today's defenses against aerial threats, from the Phalanx CIWS safeguarding ships to the CRAM shielding land outposts, represent advanced versions of the manual feats 1943 bomber crews labored over. The Phalanx unleashes 4,500 shots every minute, 75 per second, against approaching threats like missiles and planes. Its sensors perpetually compute deflections and shift firing points. It performs the identical adjustments Eddie Kowalski required above the Solomon Islands, only swifter and free from the delays that doomed countless lives in the past. Combat simulations in video games also weave in deflection dynamics, imparting that same tricky rule to gamers. Focus on the spot a foe is bound for. Titles such as War Thunder and Digital Combat Simulator demand manual leading of dynamic targets, leaving beginners with the identical irritation those 1942 crewmen endured as their tracer rounds trailed uselessly after hostile planes. Until grasping the need to anticipate, top performers cultivate the identical instinctive mastery that wartime aces honed, their movements correcting sights effortlessly, beyond deliberate effort. The leap from 4% success ratios in early 1943 to over 20% by the end of 1944 stands as one of World War II's sharpest tactical advances, gained not via better gear or sheer force, but by aligning with mental processes instead of clashing against them. Countless airmen spared from death kept soaring. Adversarial planes that might have slipped away plummeted in fire, and raids on the brink of collapse struck home. Everything stemmed from recognizing at last that gut reactions, no matter how compelling, can mislead, and endurance required drilling folks to override what seemed obvious and heed what science required. The turret operators who targeted vacant air, who compelled themselves to shoot at unseen spots, banking their projectiles would collide with foes, revealed a vital truth about resilience amid crisis. Instincts don't trap us. Given clear insight, rigorous practice, and raw urgency, we can reshape our reactions to fit the world as it is, not force the world to bend to our hunches. That insight, forged in carnage across Europe and the Pacific, holds value wherever people face paths where gut feelings and fixes diverge.